Hi, this is Claudia Filos with the Center for Hellenic Studies. I'm here today with Allie Marbry, Gregory Nagy, and Leonard Muellner. And we're here today, and we're going to read together some portions of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I mean, really just sort of asking Professor Nagy and Professor Muellner to look at those first lines and just imagine a first-time reader who's looking at these for the first time in Greek. Maybe they're using Perseus to explore the Greek for the first time. Maybe they've just, 5 or 6 sessions into learning ancient Greek. There are a lot of beautiful things that people can see about the words and about the poetics right from the start. And I was hoping you would just read some of these lines with us, sort of bringing your understanding of the text to the conversation.
Sounds like fun.
Sounds great.
Yes.
So I was thinking we'd start with the Iliad.
Yes.
The Odyssey. Sorry. Let's start with the Odyssey, which is what I already pulled up. So I'm going to pull that up on the screen.
We've got the Iliad pulled up here.
Oh, wait, you pulled up the Iliad? Okay, let's do the Iliad.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
You don't have to pull it up for us unless you want to do it yourself, because what Allie's put up on our screen.
No, it's great. So, Allie, did you already get it?
Yeah, I have it up for us. But
Great.
if you want to project it for the audience.
I will project it for the audience. And while I'm doing it, can you start talking, Lenny and Greg, sort of just looking at those words? The first line, maybe? Or
because Lenny is modest, I'll say that the first word here is a word that Lenny has written a whole book about. and the book explains why it's so important and why it is the first word of the Iliad and why it helps us understand the core meaning of the Iliad.
Right. And so what is this word?
To compress the whole idea in a minute or less than a minute.
It's where Lenny says, "Let me explain. Let me explain my book."
I think the usual translation of it is a word that's like anger, which is a kind of exciting subject for something. And I think in our culture, when I talk about this, I talk about how in our culture public expressions of anger are looked down upon and not good for people, right? And people like in recent memory, I think of a guy named Howard Dean who lost his job as the head of the Democratic Party because he went nuts at one point in a public way, right? He got angry. Whereas that's obviously not what's going on here. It's not just some kind of simple expression of anger that's frowned upon. And what I tried to show in my book is that this is a kind of term for what I described as a cosmic sanction. That is, it's a cosmic sanction for an offense against rules that are basic to the constitution of the human and the divine world. It sounds pretty heavy.
Yeah, but there it is.
So it's not somebody getting pissed off, okay?
No, and it's not. How can Achilles manage his anger?
It's not about a person with anger management problems.
No.
It's a much more powerful term than that. Okay.
And because we appreciate science fiction, many moderns do. If we add something like cosmic anger, it captures some of the shock and awe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I love it. And so what we're talking about right now, just to be super clear, is this first word that people are looking at on the first line, and they're looking at the word mīnin, right? And that's in the accusative case, signaling that it is the object of the sentence, but it's really the subject of the whole epic, right?
Nicely put. Yeah.
That's beautifully said.
Yeah.
And you should always sit up and take notice about what the first word of any composition is in this oldest period of attested Greek literature. It's very important. It's all important what the first word is.
Right.
And so the first word in the Iliad is mīnin. The first word of the Odyssey is ānδρā, and those will be very important. Now, if I may say, it's also very important that in both cases, both the Iliad and the Odyssey, that first word is, let's not say modified, that's not correct grammatically. It's described by an adjective, and a specialized adjective called an epithet. In the case of the Iliad, the epithet only occurs in the second line, oùlomenen.
Right, which is a way of postponing it. Yeah.
And Lenny has convinced me that I should always translate that as catastrophic.
Yes.
And it works. It works. It may not be the most poetic word you can find, but it works better than any other word. So now we've got, in the Iliad, anger, catastrophic anger, line 2. In the Odyssey, you have man. And what kind of man? Polytropon, somebody who turns into many different identities.
Okay.
Right.
We'll leave it at that for the time being.
Yeah.
But can I add a third thing? You not only have a first word, which is usually a noun, and then you have somewhere near the first word an epithet, which describes the noun, but then you have, get this, a relative clause.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds so boring. It sounds so, I don't know, grammatical. But Lenny and I were taught by a professor called Roman Jakobson, who used to say, there's not only a grammar of poetry, there's a poetry of grammar.
Right.
And so the relative clause is one of the most interesting things when you see it applied in the Iliad and the Odyssey individually. So let's look at the relative clauses here. Lenny, do you want to?
Please, yeah, can you read that for us?
No.
What did you say, Claudia? I didn't understand.
Sorry. First of all, Allie, do you see? Can you read it? And also, I just want to confirm, Allie, can you see that I'm screen sharing
Yes.
the lines from Persis? Okay, good. I just want to clarify that. Great.
So you want me to read the relative clause?
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah. Do you mind? That would be great.
Műri Āchaios, ālgē tεўχε. Okay, so
And that's for the Iliad.
that's the one of the Iliad, and you read the one of the Odyssey.
Posmala pola plante.
Yep.
And let's translate them. You go first.
So the relative pronoun is, in this case, which, she, who, because this word menis is feminine in gender. Okay, it's a grammatical gender thing. She, who, or which, let's call it which in English, made, ēθηκε, countless, műri, or bunches and bunches of woes for the Achaeans.
Yeah. And I'll do the Odyssey. You remember the noun that it's referring to is man. So now it's man who, posmala pola plante, who very many ways veered. In other words, was blown off course, was zigzagging,
Yes,
couldn't go in a straight line.
Yes.
And he did it
Yes.
big time, many ways.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay, so, in the background, I'm going to be bringing up the Odyssey because I can see that it's really interesting to look at these sort of side by side the way you're doing. So I'm going to pull that up in another tab so we can go back and forth easily. So that's beautiful. So we have these relative constructions. So in some sense, the one epic really seems to be aware of the other epic, right? So the tradition is very carefully constructing these in a way that works together.
But that doesn't mean that one came before the other.
No, exactly.
Right. Beautiful.
And it can play either way. If you're a member of this song culture, I don't know, when you were 6 years old and you first heard it, you may have heard one before the other, but the two are meant to be heard as first impression phrases by everybody. So you can't just say prioritize one over the other.
And I'm looking also at the first line of the Iliad, and we see that we have Achilles mentioned by name, right? But we don't have that in the Odyssey. Is that significant?
Yes, the hero, his name is postponed in the Odyssey, right?
Yes, and Lenny has done a lot of work on how you name a character for the first time.
Right.
And I'll just set it up, and then I'd love it if you told us. But basically, you and I, as moderns, when we go to school, we're punished if we use a pronoun before we say the name that the pronoun refers to. So if we say he or she, and we haven't named let's use the fancy word, the referent, the thing that the name that we're referring to, it's considered bad style. But Lenny, what's your take on the Greek way of doing things.
On the Greek way of doing things. Well, on the beginning of the Odyssey, he's not named. I think there's. Well, I'm not sure. I'm answering what you're setting me up for.
Well, okay. The setup I'm thinking about is that flip side of Homeric poetry, which is Hesiodic poetry.
Right.
And I'm thinking of Prometheus, the culture hero.
Right.
I shouldn't say hero, the culture paragon, right, of the cosmos. Uh-huh. And what happens when he gets mentioned the first time? Well, he's just a pronoun.
He's just a pronoun, yes. So that's really cool. I didn't know that, right?
No, yes, you taught me that, and you just forgot.
Okay, all right. Prometheus is really important for the Odyssey because he has really, his name has reflexes, and there are some non-coincidental things about him and Odysseus, right?
Yeah.
He's
a trickster too,
and he has relationships to, for example, the word ethos, and ithake are related, which is an epithet associated with Prometheus. And
but all I was saying is at this classics convention, I was saying, well, I have a friend who.
All right. So now I remember. All right.
Okay. Now you remember what you taught me. So why don't you dredge it up again?
I'm trying still, but how about if we switch to the fact that his name isn't given?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And talk about how.
That's all I wanted.
Okay. And conventions for naming. So the regular. The thing that I worked on was when somebody asks you who you are, you're not supposed to say I'm Odysseus, the son of Laertes. Okay, you just give your patronymic and the place where you come from. Right, you're not supposed to mention your own name. Okay, that's the etiquette rule. And there are in the Odyssey, there are a huge number of variations on this convention, and there are two people who break it in really flagrant ways. Three actually. There's Athena, who comes to Odysseus' house in disguise at the beginning of the Odyssey, and gives her first name, her own name, and she says, "I am Mentes, the son of Ἀχαιοῖs." Okay. And it's a lie because she's actually Athena. Okay.
Well, it's a lie in some context.
Yes, but it's a very assertive thing, and when because the convention in which she gives her name is Telemachus invites her into the house, which is the appropriate thing, and asks her who she is, and then when she correspondingly asks Telemachus who he is, he says, "I don't know. No one knows their own engendering." Okay, and in a sense he denies his own identity, right? And then the polar opposite is Odysseus himself, who on the island of Phaeacia later in the poem gets asked who he is, and he says, "I am Odysseus." Who is son of Laertes, who is a concern to all human beings, right?
It's Odysseus, Laertiades, os pᾶσι doloisi, ἀνδρῶν πόισι μελό.
Yes. No, but I think it's third person. It's Haas, because it's Haas, it's Melee.
No, we can look. It's Melo.
All right,
but we'll see. We'll see.
There's pᾶσι Melee, right, is the name, too.
Well, and there's the good ship Argo is pᾶσι Melusa.
Pᾶσι Melusa, yes, that's right. Sorry.
So it's, yeah.
Yeah, all right. No, let's look.
All right. So here we are in the beginning, right? And so
there
are all these important
two lines, and we haven't. So Claudia, people are going to ask for their money back.
No, all right. So I am going to guide you back to the text, actually, because that's always our priority, right? Getting back to the text and looking at it again. Can we turn back to the Iliad? And I think
this is not. Yeah, this is not a gainsaying.
No, but anyhow.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is good. Can we go back to the Iliad?
We were just settling whether it's I'm on the mind of everybody or he is on the mind of everybody, but the important thing is it's like that popular song, Carolina on my mind, or Georgia on my mind.
Right.
And there's a lot of that. But Claudia, you've got to drive us ahead, because we can't
I'll
just
get lost in this. Can I just say one more thing about in the Odyssey and the Iliad? There's only one person who does a variation on this, and that's Odysseus himself, who says that he's the father of Telemachus instead of the son of Laertes. Right? So there are all these weird things going on with them.
But there's a lot of self-consciousness about naming, and I think Claudia was very wise to point us in that direction. Is how come if andra is the first word and it means man, how come he's not identified right off the bat?
Right. Whereas Achilles is.
Achilles is.
Yep.
Okay. So turning back to the Iliad, I want to draw us to line 3, which has another word that Lenny, you've thought about, which is the third word in that line. Iphthymus, right? Iphthymus.
Yes. Okay.
And I was wondering let's just talk about that line. Can you read that line and give us and maybe even the first line, the first word of the next line, and sort of we could start talking about that. Πολλας iphthymus, right?
Why don't you read it?
No. Please, you go.
All right. Greg, do it then, because I already read one.
Okay, great.
Okay, πολλας ηφθίμους ψυχάς ἀίδη προΐαψεν. What's very weird is there's no long short alternation in the first part of the line, so I can't give you any rhythm there, because rhythm happens only when you alternate long and short. So once again, πολλας ηφθίμους ψυχάς ἀίδη προΐαψεν. So up through ψυχάς, every syllable is long.
Right.
Yeah.
And now I think Lenny should treat us to okay, so what is this many blankety blank psychai? I hate the translation souls.
Right.
Many souls of
and then ἰρώων is the next
of heroes did this anger do such and such. But what about the ηφθίμους?
Okay. So this is a word that you can see that the gender is weird, because it's modifying psychas, which is feminine, and ηφθίμους is the masculine ending normally, and that's a feature of compound adjectives as well as old adjectives in epic. That you have one form that's both masculine and feminine, ηφθίμους, modifying psychas. But the problem is, what does this word mean? The conventional translation of it is strong, which seems paradoxical, because if there's one thing that psychai are not, it's strong, right? The psyche, as it's envisioned in the epic, is a thumbnail image of a person, right?
Yes.
And it's something that, for example, at a later point near the end of the Iliad, Achilles sees the psyche of his friend Patroclus in a dream, and he tries to embrace him, and he says there are no ines in you. His hands just go through him. Okay. So there's no sinew in you is what that word seems to mean. Okay? So calling a person's psyche or a group of psychai ηφθίμος, meaning strong, doesn't seem right. So there's a lot of churning about what this word means, and I made an effort to look at all the examples, and I think it might mean, okay, synchronically at least, something like steadfast. That is, it's a term that's more social, has more social connotations than have to do with physical strength. Okay, it's about the solidarity of the group. So it's a group of psychai who are bound to one another in social terms.
And when you're alive, that's your breath of life, so that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
When you're dead, just as Lenny said, then it's a puff of smoke. It's without substance.
Yes, exactly.
Could I say something, however, about the next line? And I think Claudia will be proud of us that we're now actually moving to line 4 of the Iliad.
Yes.
Αὐτοὺς means themselves, and this really messes up the thinking of us moderns, because we keep saying body and soul, but we're kind of trained to think of the soul as the self.
Right.
In other words, you can say, well, that's that person's dead body, but the self, that's the soul, and maybe it's immortal, and so on and so forth. But look what's happening here. You have, at the point of death, the psyche, if you want to say soul, or the life spirit, leaves the body, but then what's left behind? It's the corpse. It's the inanimate corpse, and yet in Homeric Greek, that's called αὐτοὺς, themselves.
Yep.
So it's the body that's the self, even after the body is no longer alive, it's no longer kicking, and it's still the self.
Right.
So that is a real shocker, I think, for the modern mind when we first try to wrap our thinking around this.
Right. And so, Greg, now the word preceding this is a word you've really spent your whole life thinking about, єρώων, right? So this is the genitive plural for heroes. So, I mean, so it's, you could talk really for years about that. So, but can you just say, maybe in a sentence or two, could you summarize sort of the main facts about a hero?
Yeah, the important thing about a hero is that unlike us, we're really not sure about our genealogy, but every hero is descended somewhere in his or her family tree from a god.
Right.
And if you're really lucky, like Achilles, your own mother is a god, an immortal divinity. In which case, and this is tricky, in which case you think, well, he's a demigod because he's got a mortal father and an immortal mother. But that's very misleading, because in fact, what's really important is whether you have gods in your genes or you don't. And I love to ask this question, which is the dominant gene and which is the recessive gene? And the answer, spoiler alert, is that mortality is the dominant gene. All it takes is one mortal to be in your family tree, and you have to die, like everybody else, and you have to die no matter how larger than life you are, which is what heroes are. They're like us, today's people, in that they too have to die. Unlike the gods, the Olympian gods, who did not have to die in this Olympian scheme. Now, we could go on and on about how earlier stages of Greek myth and ritual did definitely have dying gods, but as far as the Iliad and the Odyssey are concerned, if you're a god whose residence, whose zip code is Olympus, you're immortal. You're exempt from death. And so is that satisfactory?
That's beautiful. Right, and so that gives us sort of this hint that as we learn more and more about heroes, if people haven't had the chance to take the Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours, that online project. So just this idea about the psyche of the hero and the body of the hero, here in these lines of, these are such important themes, and that poetry is sort of pointing us towards that right from the very beginning, that we need to be aware of these things.
Exactly. Isn't it wonderful that essentially the first few lines of the Iliad and the first few lines of the Odyssey really tell you what these epics are about? And we're talking about, in the case of the Iliad, 15,000 plus verses, in the case of the Odyssey, 12,000 plus verses, and yet you can take a shortcut about what they're about just by looking at the lines that you, Claudia, are guiding us through. But wait, we're neglecting the Odyssey. We're still nowhere with the Odyssey. What are we going to do?
You know, honestly, in terms of, I do like reading them back and forth, especially in the beginning. So maybe in this first session we can do that. I think if we continue, it would be good to go cohesively through some lines of the text. That way, when we package them later, it's a little bit. See what I mean?
But
if you'd like to go,
I know what you mean, Claudia, and so maybe let me backtrack. I think the only place where we really have to look at the Iliad and the Odyssey together is what the first word is, what the epithet is that describes the first word, and what the relative clause is. But now, why don't we just have a split in the road and try to do give equal time to the Iliad first and the Odyssey second? How does that sound?
Is that okay? Yeah, it'd be beautiful.
What I said about let's go to the Odyssey. Let's not go to the Odyssey yet. Let's.
Yeah, actually, if we get through this first sentence, that would be great. I think.
Okay.
And so, so here we are. So we have this distinction between the souls of the heroes and what's happening with their corpses. And so we get to line 5. Maybe Lenny, can you read this one?
So oionoīsī pāsī, dīos tetelēta vule. So there's another version of this line that has a support that's quite old, which is oionoīsī daita. Oionoīsī pāsī means for all birds, and oionoīsī daita means a feast for birds. Okay. But the important thing, at least from my point of view, is that what's being described here in the continuation from line 4, translating it. And it made themselves, that is, their corpses, heloria kudase, a prey for dogs, and either for all birds and a feast for birds. What we're talking about here is something that is a taboo in the epic world. That is, that the corpse of a human being be exposed and made the prey for dogs and birds. It's a horrifying prospect.
Well, it's something that people wish for. People, when they're cussing out somebody else, say that this is what I hope will happen
to you,
which is you drop dead, you start putrefying, and then dogs and birds pick your bones clean. So there's nothing worse. There's nothing worse. But what Lenny's saying is it never really happens in straight-out narrative, in straight-out storytelling. People wish it. People are worried that it'll happen in the future. It's always it's a modality.
It's a modality, yes. But here it's presented as a truth, right? That's a result of the menace of Achilles, right?
But it's still a modality because it's. Can you tell me, Muse, what happened?
Okay.
It's not yet. The Muse hasn't started narrating.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a hyperbolic statement.
It's an imperative.
Yes.
It's a modality.
Okay. But the one thing that is interesting about it is that one of the things that causes the menace of gods is if you do expose a body. So that's a violation of rules about how the world works.
It's not human because it's not civilized.
Right. And so it's such a disturbance, if you want, in the way in which the world works to do that you get a cosmic sanction in terms of menace if you do that.
And what I love about this is that what is the ultimate horror, or as Marlon Brando would have said in, what is it, the movie version of Apocalypse Now, the horror, the ultimate horror, which is having your body being devoured by birds and dogs. In this particular Indo-European tradition, we'll explain what Indo-European is in a minute. It is in other Indo-European traditions the proper way to dispose of your loved ones when they die. So I'm thinking of the Zoroastrian traditions where cremation is an abomination, and where the way to process corpses after they die is to put them in a tower of silence, way up there in the heights, and to have dogs and get access, and of course birds have access already from the air, so dogs and birds pick the bones clean. And in places like Mumbai today, you can still see that. Well, you're not allowed to see it by the Parsis, but it's still the custom. And then in other places, DDT has got rid of the the vultures, unfortunately. So there are other ways. But the point is that you have languages that are related to each other, reflecting related customs,
Right.
being 180 degrees apart here.
I mean, the Zoroastrianism in particular has the susceptibility to that kind of inversion of what seems to be a norm in other Indo-European cultures, right?
Yeah.
For example, Zoroaster himself, when he was born, he didn't cry, he laughed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of
there's
flips.
that flip,
You know,
yeah.
there's a lot of flips. But my point is that this is the ultimate horror,
Yes, exactly.
and ethically and every which way, the thing that you just don't want ever to happen to yourself.
Is this, yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so, so how about the second half of this line?
Let's talk about the next part of this, second part of this line, since you
Right.
Oh, well, you know what? I can do it quickly because and this is important, we do want to say something about the Odyssey before Claudia shuts us down.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so just very, very quickly,
I'll go back to it.
the will of Zeus, or the plan of Zeus, is, at least on the surface, the plot of the entire 15,000 plus verses of the Iliad. That is what the Iliad is about, what Zeus wanted to happen.
Right.
Now, that gives us pause, and we should talk for not just hours, but weeks about that. But I already want to say that in the Odyssey, in a part that we won't be seeing, because it's like 20 verses ahead, Zeus will say, I don't know why humans blame us for all the messes they get into. They make the messes and then they turn around and blame us as if we willed it. So that makes it look like, oh, the Iliad is equating the plot of the story with the will of Zeus. The Odyssey is denying that the plot of the story is the will of Zeus. It turns out that both epics
There's a will of Zeus in the Odyssey too.
have a lot of, shall we say, crossings, mutual crossings, and there are a lot of situations in the Iliad where people do seem to make their own messes, and flip side, a lot of situations in the Odyssey where people are definitely locked into a pattern that is part of the great cosmic scheme.
Right. Okay.
Beautiful. So, so Lenny, do you have anything else you wanted to share about the second half of that line, or,
No.
or shall we move on?
Except for the word ateleiata, which implies that there's that's a form of a verbal root derived from the noun telos, which is a heavy word itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with fulfillment, and the notion is that the story, as Greg put it, comes to a completion and a proper end at the end of the Iliad, right?
It's a purposeful completion.
Exactly.
It's something that it is a real structured plot, and if I can put it in terms of using the alphabet, our alphabet as a symbol, you go all the way from A to Z.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've got to get to Z, and when you get to Z or Z, then you have a completion.
Yeah.
But if you stop at Y, you don't have a completion.
That's right. So the ending is an ending in a beautiful, and important, and powerful way.
And it's not just an ending; it's a fulfillment. It's a conclusion.
Yeah.
It gives you a sense of integrity. Okay, now I see the big picture.
Right. So we're here at the beginning. We're already invoking the end, right? And
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's so, and in the original Greek, what the original Greek says is that it's heading in that direction. It's not saying that it's there.
Nope.
It's just, well, this is part of the ABCs of it, and at this point we're still at the ABCs, but we're going to get to XYZ.
Okay.
So it's in process. Okay. And how about the next line? Greg, could you
say something about this one? This is ex hou
Please,
ta prota diaste ten erisante. So it's from the time when ta prota, that first time, or the two of them, that form diaste ten as a dual subject, stood apart erisanta, and this is another important word in strife. Eris is one of the old ancient names of the first scroll of the Iliad, right? So this concept of eris is important.
You want to use another word besides strife?
Yeah, it's about competitive conflict.
Quarreling.
Quarreling, yep.
Mm. So, Greg, can I actually ask about that? Because I know you've done some work on eris and nekos, right? And on the start of Indo-European epics in general. So this is something that's very traditional again that we're seeing.
Oh yes.
Before you do, please, I want you to do that, but I want
to talk
go. About this earlier in the line, the word ex who, okay, from the time when, which we talked about how you start with the subject of the poem as a direct object back in line 1, and then you have an epithet, and then you have a relative clause. One of the other things that you have in common between the two prologues is you give a starting point, okay, and ex who is making precisely known what the starting point of the epic is going to be.
Yeah.
And grammatically speaking, therefore, it goes back to the second word of the poem, ἀίδε. It's sing from the time when, right? It goes very far back syntactically.
Pick a starting point.
Yes. Okay.
Or as that horrible song in Love Story says, "Where do I begin?"
Yes.
Well, this is where I begin.
This is another fixed feature, and the Odyssey does a very interesting thing, which you will be very because you taught me about that. Yes. But I think it's an extraordinary stretch. This is one sentence, right?
Yeah.
In which you have that relative clause, and then the rest of the sentences have a parallel syntax to the relative clause. They're no longer the relative. You've gotten out of the relative syntax, right? It's which caused many countless woes for the Achaeans, and it, okay, and all the other sentences are in the same vein, connected by de, okay, and it, until you get to the exu, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very long sentence in epic terms, and in terms of the conventions of the thing, and then going back all the way from ἀίδε to exu is an extraordinary thing, I think, in terms of epic syntax.
It's a jewel. It's all beautifully put together, and so the syntax, if I can go back to our teacher Jakobson, is a grammatical marvel. It's again the poetry of grammar. Yeah. The grammar is so beautiful that we can just love it for its own sake, and we do. People like Lenny and I do. We do love the grammar.
Yeah, that's amazing. In fact, the more that is a gem. Like these are the moments that it might not necessarily be easy for someone reading on the first time on their own to ever see, right, to understand. And so that's why we're so delighted to talk to you.
Even for people like us, it's still a challenge each time. Could I just say that in the Odyssey, in line 10,
yes,
in the Odyssey, where do we start there? And it says, oh, start anywhere. Well, and that's what it seems to be saying. Of all those places where we could start, tell me or tell us, O goddess of total recall, O goddess of perfect memory of everything that happened in the past. Tell me where to start. Name any place. Just start anywhere. And then in line 11. Okay, we'll start at this point, and then it starts where it starts. Yeah. But since Claudia, you mentioned that Odysseus isn't named, and also the starting point isn't really named until you get into the story, and then you realize, okay, I think I'm getting my bearings, I think I get it. Okay, we're going to start in the cave of the nymph.
Right. And the Odyssey in general does a lot of switching back and forth and of telling stories.
There's flashbacks, flash forwards. It's a marvel of zigzagging storytelling. And that's what Mr. O is. He is polytropos. And could we say to you, Claudia, and to all our friends out there, that the only other personality who gets this epithet, that's our word for a fancy adjective, is Hermes, the shapeshifter, the mercurial personality who can be anything to anybody. And in the Homeric hymn to Hermes, aka Mercury is what the Romans called him, he is the shapeshifter, and he gets this epithet all the time. In the Odyssey, this is the only time anybody gets this epithet, except for one other time when Circe, the witch, finally starting to figure out who Odysseus is. I mean, she doesn't know yet because he hasn't been named. And she says, "Oh, are you by any chance Odysseus, Polytropos, the one who can turn into many things?" This epithet here. Yeah. And Hermes has told me so much about him. And so there you have the Hermetic signature, the mercurial personality. And it's no accident that in medieval alchemy, Mercury is the shape-shifting element.
Yeah. So can I ask a question? Because these are things you've already been highlighting now between the two. On the one hand, you're pointing towards the opening of the Iliad and the sense that, okay, we're on this path from A to Z, the language is signifying we're still in the beginning, but we're headed there. We have this very clear path, whereas in the Odyssey, it sounds like you're saying there's a sense of disorientation, right? Oh, yes. We're not really sure what the subject is. We're going to move around a bit. We're not sure where to start. And then now you're pointing us towards Mercury, but he's really the god who takes you back and forth. Yes. So he's not the god of disorientation, so that's kind of interesting, right?
Is that nice? Yeah. I think you said that beautifully, Claudia.
Okay. All right. Well, so that is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So should we go back to the Iliad?
Okay. Yeah, we got another line or two.
Yeah, if we could get to the end of that, that would be great.
Yeah, let's try
it. Sorry. So now I need to orient myself again. Where are we? Okay, I see where we are. So now, wow. Okay, so now we're at line 7. So yeah, Ātrεΐδης, right?
Yeah.
Would you like to?
Those are the two people who quarreled.
Right, and they're at either end of the line, right? Ātrεΐδης at the beginning and Ἀχιλῆος at the end, right?
Right. So what's going on here? So these are the two that are in conflict together, Achilles and the son of Ātrεΐdης, who's Menelaus, right? Atreus. Sorry. Menelaus, right?
No, Agamemnon.
What am I saying?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
No, I think you're saying this because I've been inflicting that paper on you that I just wrote, where where
yes, I do know who
on the fact that if you have son of Atreus all by himself, it's always Agamemnon, and only in special circumstances is the recessive brother Menelaus called Ātrεΐδης all by himself.
You've made it clear that it has
very
to be
weird context, but the dominant son of Atreus is Agamemnon. So that was an honest mistake by Claudia, who just read too much of Greg this week.
No, I think I'm just out of it because it's my birthday. Okay, so
and happy birthday again.
Happy birthday, yes.
Thank you. So, and then we have in our next line, maybe we could just do that. We have a question, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because the narration hasn't started yet. We're just setting the table here about, well, how's the story going to begin? What's the framework? What are the parameters? What is A? What is Z? But we haven't started the storytelling, so an important question here. So what was the cause? And here's where we should call on Lenny to talk about two kinds of anger. We thought that the anger is simply the anger of Achilles, but it turns out that there's somebody maybe more important in the cosmos, maybe.
Because the anger, there's a preceding anger to the anger of Achilles in the poem, in the narrative, and that's the anger of Apollo, who's the god who's the answer to the question in line 8, right? Stars, theòν, ἐρηδίξ, τεῦχε, Ἀχαιοῖς. Who of the gods set the two of them together to fight in strife? And there's Eris again, right? Picking up on the Eris Santa in line 6. So, then the answer is Lητοῦς kai dios, the son of Zeus and Leto, who's Apollo. Okay, and he's a model, if you will, in the narrative and I think in other ways for the mænus of Achilles, and he definitely gets this very special word for anger applied to him before we get it applied in the narrative itself to Achilles.
And I think, you know, at this point we're now getting into the meat of the storytelling.
Right.
And maybe just one other thing, and that is when you look at the Iliad and everything that it says, there's two kinds of big devastation going on. They're both called loimos. One of them is the fact that Achaeans are dying left and right in ways they wouldn't have because Achilles is sitting it out because he has his anger. But on the other hand, there's before that Achaeans dying left and right because of a disease that Apollo sends because he's angry. So there are two kinds of consequences to this anger called mænus. When Achilles has it, the devastation, the loimos is
it loimos or loigos?
Oops.
It's loigos, right?
Actually,
there's loime, which is the plague, right? Or loimos is the plague.
Yeah, you're right, because limos is starvation and loimos is plague. I think loimos may also occur, but loigos is, you're right, I stand corrected. So it's loigos, not loimos. And loigos is the devastation. That is disease when Apollo causes it. And it's heavy losses in
hands of the Trojans,
of lives for the Achaeans.
So there's
no, go ahead, Lenny. I'm sorry.
So there's a complex set of that's an example of the terminology of mænus that gets reproduced between the mænus of Apollo and the mænus of Achilles. It's an epic theme with a cluster of words and concepts that keep on coming up in relationship to it.
It's amazing. Okay, well, you know, I think this is actually a good place to stop. There's never really a good place to stop because it's all so beautiful.
But there's such guilt. There's such guilt about how we've left the introduction to the Odyssey really dangling.
Well, so this is part of my plan. So now we'll have to do another video, and next time we'll do the Odyssey. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. And in the meantime, we'll just stay guilty.
Yes, and maybe we should have Doug talk about the
there are two key words that Doug, the third of the three amigos, could very beautifully handle, which would really set the table for what the Odyssey is all about.
Which are notos and nostos, right?
Yes, at least we heralded the words noos, mind, and nostos, homecoming.
Yes.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so until next time, I can't wait. Thank you so much for doing this. It was so much fun. Thank you, Allie, and we'll talk soon.
And happy birthday to Claudia.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.